My parents abandoned me. At 13, unaware that 15 years later they'd be begging at my door. I'm Beckett, 28, male. 6'1", a little gray at the temples already, and the kind of guy who double-checks every lock before bed because the one time I didn't have a safety net, it cost me everything. I run a mid-sized commercial landscaping company in Columbus, Ohio. 12 employees, 2 trucks, and more contracts than I can comfortably handle alone. From the outside, it looks like I built something solid. And I did. But most people don't know the foundation that solid thing was built on, which was nothing. Literally nothing. At 13 years old, I was handed nothing, pointed toward the door, and told more or less to figure it out. Here's what happened. My parents' marriage had been rotting for years before it finally collapsed. I knew it the way kids know things, through walls, through silences, through the way my father stopped sitting at the dinner table and started eating standing over the kitchen counter like he was ready to leave at any second. When I was 12, he did leave. Moved 3 states over to be with a woman he'd apparently been seeing for the better part of 2 years. My mother, rather than grieving privately, decided the solution to her heartbreak was to find a replacement as fast as humanly possible. By the time I turned 13, there was a new man living in our house. He had 2 kids of his own, younger than me, and from the moment he moved in, the dynamic was crystal clear. I wasn't a son anymore. I was a complication, a reminder of a marriage that had failed. A teenager with opinions and sharp elbows who took up space and didn't belong to anyone in that new arrangement. The conversations happened fast. I remember my mother sitting me down at the kitchen table, not making eye contact, turning a coffee mug around and around in her hands. "Your grandmother's offered to have you stay with her for a while," she said, "just while things settle down here." "How long is a while?" I asked. She didn't answer that. I moved in with my grandmother 2 weeks before my 14th birthday. My father called once from wherever he was, said something vague about it being a temporary thing, and then went largely silent. My mother sent money sporadically, enough to signal guilt, but not enough to signal actual responsibility. Neither of them showed up for my 8th grade graduation. Neither of them showed up for anything, actually. But my grandmother did. She was 71 years old when I moved into her 2-bedroom house on the east side of Columbus. She was small, sharp-tongued when she needed to be, and completely uninterested in letting me feel sorry for myself. She made me do chores, made me keep my grades up, made me take a job mowing lawns in the neighborhood at 15, because, she said, idle hands were a problem she wasn't going to allow. She fed me every night, sat across the table from me every single dinner, and asked about my day like the answer genuinely mattered to her. She was the only reason I turned out okay. I lived with her through high school, went to Columbus State on a partial scholarship, and worked landscaping jobs to cover the rest. By 23, I had enough saved to buy my first used truck and start taking contracts on my own. By 25, I had 3 employees. By 27, I had 12. My grandmother watched all of it. Came to my company's 2nd anniversary dinner, sat at the head of the table, and told everyone within earshot that I'd built something real. She was 83 by then, still sharp, still herself. She passed in January of last year quietly in her sleep, 2 weeks after Christmas. I was with her. She left me everything. The house, paid off years ago. A savings account with just over $340,000 in it. Money she'd accumulated carefully over decades, a little at a time, never making a fuss about it. A handwritten letter in her bedside drawer. And something else. Something I didn't fully understand the weight of until later. She had made a video will. Her estate attorney had filmed it 6 months before she died. My grandmother, sitting in the good chair in her living room, looking directly into the camera, and explaining exactly why she was leaving her estate to me and not to her own children. She named my mother and my father by their relationship to her, not by name. She described, calmly and with devastating specificity, the phone calls she'd had with each of them over the years when she'd asked them to step up for me. She described the time my mother had called her, not to ask about me, but to complain that she felt guilty, and then asked if grandmother could just officially take guardianship so the paperwork would be cleaner. She described my father's visit 3 years after he'd left, the only time he'd come back to Columbus, during which he had spent 40 minutes asking my grandmother whether she'd updated her will and 0 minutes asking about me. She'd been watching, recording, documenting in her careful, meticulous way. I didn't know any of this until the estate attorney played the video at the will reading in March. I also didn't know that my parents had already been contacted. The attorney had sent notification letters to my mother and father as required by Ohio law, since they were the testator's adult children and potential heirs. The will cut them out entirely. Under Ohio law, a parent has no automatic right to a child's estate, the way a spouse might. There is no forced share provision protecting adult children of a deceased parent. The will was clean, properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. My grandmother had done everything right. That didn't stop them from showing up. My mother arrived first. She knocked on the door of the house, my house now, on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, about 3 weeks after the will reading. I opened the door and looked at her. She was 61. She looked tired in the way people look tired when life hasn't gone the way they planned. "I know this is hard," she said before I could speak. "Is it?" I said. She came inside because I let her, which I later questioned. She sat in the living room, her own mother's living room, the one she'd visited maybe 4 times in the past 15 years, and told me she thought the will had been made under unusual circumstances, that my grandmother had been influenced. She used the phrase undue influence, which told me she'd already spoken to someone with a law degree. "You were living with her," she said. "You had access. You were the last person with her." I just looked at her. "Mom," I said very quietly, "I was the only person with her. That's the whole point." She shifted gears fast. Pulled out the sympathy card next. Said she knew she hadn't been perfect. Said she thought about it. Said she'd had her own struggles and her new husband had been going through things and the timing had just been bad. "The timing," I repeated. "I was dealing with a lot, Beckett. I was 13. She left without getting anywhere, but she didn't drop it. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from an attorney in her name, formally contesting the will on the grounds of alleged undue influence and questioning my grandmother's testamentary capacity at the time the video will was recorded. In Ohio, contesting a will based on undue influence or lack of testamentary capacity is a serious legal claim that has to be proven by clear and convincing evidence. My grandmother had been evaluated by her own physician 6 months before the will was recorded. Her estate attorney had documented her orientation and cognition before filming. The video itself showed a woman who was completely coherent, citing specific dates, conversations, and reasons. The case my mother was trying to build had no foundation, and any competent probate attorney would have told her that. Which was exactly what my attorney told me when I walked into his office. "They're fishing," he said. "The video alone defeats the undue influence claim." She explains her reasoning herself, on camera with precision. "This doesn't go anywhere." He was right, but right doesn't mean free. It means expensive. It means depositions and response filings and months of dragging something out in Franklin County Probate Court while the estate sits in partial hold. That was the play. Drain me. Make it painful enough that I'd settle. My father showed up around the same time the legal letter arrived, which told me the two of them had been coordinating. He drove up from wherever he was living now, somewhere in Tennessee, and knocked on the door on a Saturday morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was older than I expected. Heavier. He had the look of a man who'd made a series of choices and was now standing in the wreckage of them, looking for a door marked exit. "I want to talk to you man to man," he said. He came inside too. Sat at the same kitchen table where, 15 years ago, my mother had told me grandmother had offered to take me in. He said he understood why I was upset. He said he'd made mistakes. He said he hoped we could get past the legal stuff, his words, and work something out between family. He suggested that a reasonable person might look at the situation and see that his mother, my grandmother, would have wanted her children to benefit too. That it wasn't right for me to take everything when he and my mother were, quote, struggling. You were struggling, I said, when you were paying someone to contest the will? He looked at the table. Then he pivoted. Said he'd heard the company was doing well. Said he was proud of me, which landed like a stone in still water. Said maybe I could help him out separate from the estate entirely, just family helping family. He floated a number. $60,000. I showed him the door. What happened over the next 4 months was a coordinated campaign to make my life difficult enough that I'd write a check just to make it stop. My mother's attorney sent a subpoena to my grandmother's doctor requesting all medical records from the last 2 years of her life. Standard fishing, but it meant delays. They filed a motion requesting an independent evaluation of the video will recording, which the court allowed, adding another 8 weeks to the timeline. My father showed up twice more at the house unannounced. The second time, he brought the woman he'd been with since he left, the same one he'd left our family for, as if bringing her would somehow soften the atmosphere. He stood on the porch and told me that his mother would be horrified by what was happening. She documented why she made this decision, I said from the doorway. On camera, you've seen the video. That video doesn't tell the whole story, he said. It tells her story, I said, in her words, which is the only one that matters. He tried one more thing before the court proceedings got fully underway. He called my grandmother's sister, who was still alive in her late 80s, living in Cincinnati, and somehow convinced her to write a statement suggesting that my grandmother had mentioned feeling pressured in her final months. I found this out when my attorney called me with the news. I drove to Cincinnati the following weekend. My grandmother's sister was sharp enough that when I sat down with her and explained what was happening, the contested will, the statement she'd apparently signed, what my father had told her to get her signature, she went quiet for a long time. He told me the house was going to be sold by the government, she said finally. He said you were in legal trouble and the estate was going to be taken to pay debts. I pulled out my phone and showed her the court filings, showed her the actual probate record, showed her my grandmother's video, playing it on the small screen with the volume low. She watched the whole thing without speaking. Then she called her own attorney and retracted the statement, in writing, with a secondary declaration explaining how she'd been misled into signing the original. That was my father committing fraud to influence a legal proceeding. It wasn't some gray area. Submitting a false declaration to a probate court in Ohio is perjury adjacent at minimum, and suborning that false statement is worse. My attorney filed a motion immediately, attaching the retraction and the declaration explaining how it had been obtained. The probate judge was not subtle in her response. She issued a sharp written rebuke, noted the conduct in the case record, and scheduled a hearing. At that hearing, the will contest effectively collapsed. My mother's attorney quietly withdrew the undue influence claim after the independent evaluator's report came back, finding zero evidence of cognitive impairment in the video recording. The testamentary capacity argument died the same week. The false declaration incident poisoned what little goodwill they had with the court, and the judge made clear in her oral ruling that the contest had been pursued without evidentiary foundation. The estate was released to me in full in August, 14 months after my grandmother died. But I wasn't done. While all of this was unfolding in probate court, I had been doing something else quietly. Something my grandmother had actually suggested in her handwritten letter, which I'd read so many times by then that I'd memorized it. She wrote, "I kept records, sweetheart. Everything. Check the gray box in the top of the hall closet." The gray box contained 15 years of paperwork, bank statements, letters, notes. My grandmother had written to herself with dates and summaries of phone calls. And one thing that made my attorney sit up very straight when I put it in front of him. My mother had been collecting a dependent tax deduction for me for 3 years after I moved in with my grandmother. Years in which she had not provided more than half my support, the legal threshold under IRS rules, because she wasn't providing any support at all. My grandmother had receipts, school records showing her address as mine. medical bills in her name, grocery receipts she'd stapled to calendar pages. 3 years of fraudulent dependent deductions. The financial benefit wasn't enormous, but the violation was clear and documented. My attorney and I discussed it carefully. I wasn't looking to put my mother in prison, but I was looking for the fraud to be on record somewhere real, somewhere it couldn't be hand-waved away. We filed a referral to the IRS with the documentation attached. Under IRS procedures, they investigate on their own timeline without obligation to loop me in, but the referral goes into the file, the audit gets triggered, and the outcome is theirs to determine. My father's conduct during the probate case, the false declaration scheme with my grandmother's sister, had already been referred to the Ohio State Bar for review of the attorney who'd filed the original false statement. And my attorney had sent a separate letter to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office documenting the conduct for their consideration. Whether that went anywhere prosecutorially was out of my hands, but the letter existed. The documentation existed. It was all sitting in files now, in offices my father had no access to. I also did one more thing. Something smaller, but that landed exactly where I needed it to land. My father's Tennessee-based company, a small contracting outfit he'd been running, had bid on a commercial landscaping contract in the Columbus metro area. I found out through a mutual contact in the industry, someone who mentioned it casually, not knowing the full picture. The bid was for a municipal contract, which is public record. My company also bid. I bid correctly, competitively, and won on the merits. Lower price, better references, more local infrastructure. I didn't do anything underhanded. I just did my job better than he did. He found out it was my company that won the contract through the public record. He called me, once, left a voicemail that I still have. "You know what you did," he said on the voicemail. "You did this on purpose." I won a fair bid. That's it. But yes, I knew what I was doing. The estate closed. The house is mine. The savings account funded a significant expansion of my company, 3 new trucks, 2 additional crews. The contract we won from that municipal bid is ongoing. My mother sent me an email in September. No apology exactly, but something in the vicinity of one. She said she hoped we could rebuild something eventually. I read it twice and then put it in a folder. I haven't responded. I don't know if I will. Some doors don't close clean and some don't open clean either. My father has not reached out since the voicemail. The IRS audit on my mother's prior returns is, as far as I know, ongoing. I haven't been contacted as part of it and don't expect to be. The attorney disciplinary matter is pending. These things move slowly. They move, though. My grandmother used to say that patience isn't about waiting. It's about knowing what you're waiting for. She sat across from me at that table every night for 4 years and made sure I understood the difference between something that's hard and something that's wrong. She also made sure I had the receipts to prove the difference. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. If this story hits you somewhere real, the kind of hit that makes you want to know what happens to people who think abandonment has no consequences, go ahead and subscribe. Consider it your own act of showing up. Unlike certain parents, I promise I'll actually be here.